Hi Year 11, so this is a quick video that is going to walk you through a sample answer for A Christmas Carol for your mock. You'll be able to see a really high level answer based on a practice question, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what the answer does really well, and then you can use that to help yourself in preparing for your mocks. So I'm just going to remind you of the fact that your mock exam is on Wednesday the 11th of November, and you've got Inspector Calls and A Christmas Carol. 1 hour 40 minutes if you have a normal amount of time. This equates to about 50 minutes per section. We're recommending you spend 5 minutes to read, annotate and plan, because you're going to have extracts to look at, and 40 minutes to write each section, maybe 20 minutes on each bullet point or 15 minutes on each paragraph, something like that. And then 5 minutes to check and proofread. Even though there aren't any spag marks for this exam, it's still really useful to proofread to make sure that everything makes sense and you haven't, missed an and out or missed had or something silly like that. If you have extra time, it's 2 hours and 5 minutes, and I would suggest that you spend your extra time writing your bullet points and also making sure that you still go back and check at the end. So Christmas Carol is this one we're looking at. You are going to be given an extract, and you're going to need to link the extract to the rest of the novella. And it's probably going to be based on, it's going to be based on a character, theme or idea from A Christmas Carol. And it's linked to AO 1, 2 and 3. So thinking about the AOs and the assessment objectives. AO 1. Read, understand and respond to text, maintaining a critical style and developing an informed personal response through textual references, including quotations to support and illustrate interpretations. Interpretation is a really important word in AO1. AO1 is essentially, do you understand the text? Do you know what it's about? Have you got your own ideas about it? Or are you just regurgitating things? The more you have your own ideas, the more you'll move up the mark scheme, and we'll talk about the mark scheme in a little bit. AO2 is essentially the analysis. Analyse the language, form and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects, using appropriate subject terminology where appropriate to support. Can I just point your attention to the form and structure? Form being the form of a novella. Also in terms of A Christmas Carol, you can talk about the form in terms of the staves and the way that they create meaning, and the structure in terms of what happens at which point in the novella and how staves end and lead on to one another. So for example, you might think about the drama of the end of stave 2, where Scrooge plunges the extinguisher cap on top of the ghost of Christmas past. And then AO3 is quite simply the context. Show an understanding of the relationships between texts and the historical and social contexts in which they were written, and how this might impact the text or meaning. So anything about Victorian times or Dickens' life or poverty, things like that. So having a look at the mark scheme, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. You guys have seen this before, but I just want to remind you that all the skills in English are the same, but how you move up the mark scheme is by showing a more developed version of that skill. So as that skill develops, you move up the mark scheme. So here we have simple comments, then we have supported response, and here we get to some explained response. So I'm sure that even if there was someone at a level 1, they would still be doing things like making comments on the text and maybe potentially looking at language, but they're doing it in a simple way. So it's about moving up the mark scheme by furthering your depth. If we have a look at these levels, which are the ones we're obviously aiming for, level 4 takes us into clear understanding. So everything you're saying needs to be very clearly explained, and not just, what you say is clear, but you are explaining the ideas behind it. Level 5 gets you up to thoughtful and developed, and then examination of writers' methods, which means that you're not just saying it creates this effect, but you're suggesting how it makes that effect through certain particular techniques, and you're going into more depth. And then up here, level 6, the top one, critical, exploratory, conceptualized. And this is where you are coming up with your own interpretations. You're saying things that come up to you and not necessarily everyone else, or you're thinking of alternative ideas. Analysis of writers' methods, you are looking very deeply into the words, the language and the structure, and the exploration of ideas of contextual factors, not just stating them, but explaining the link between the contextual factors and the novella as a whole. So this is a really high level sample answer, and the question was about how Dickens uses Belle to explore the theme of greed. As you can imagine, the extract was the part in the second stave where Belle is telling Scrooge that she doesn't love him anymore and she doesn't want to be with him anymore. I'm not going to read this aloud. If you want, you can pause the video here and then go ahead and read it yourself. But what I'm going to do is move straight on to having a look at the paragraphs in more detail. So I've put the AOs up here in the top right. So AO1 is knowledge and understanding. AO2 is analysis of language form and structure and effects on the reader, and AO3 is context. And as we go through the paragraphs, I'm going to highlight some key points that this person is doing and show how they are meeting the AOs in their depth. So first off here is where they say the writer uses Belle and the theme of greed to demonstrate both Scrooge's personality and issues in society. And this is a thoughtful understanding of the text. They're not only considering Scrooge as a person, but they're thinking about the wider societal issues that Dickens was trying to fight against. Here as well, where they've used the quote, "You will dismiss it as an unprofitable dream." Very thoughtful use of the quotes. Of course, they've used the ellipsis here twice to shorten the quote to make it a lot more streamlined, which is very, very useful. And this is a very thoughtful quote because they're only including the key parts. Next, we've got some AO2. So the adjective unprofitable shows how strong Scrooge's obsession with money is, and the fact that Scrooge might just dismiss it also shows how little he seemingly cares about his relationship. So here they're zooming in on the word unprofitable, but they're also suggesting the effects of language and making these very clear inferences about how little he seemingly cares about their relationship. The next part as well, without talking in monetary or business terms, Scrooge simply won't understand. This is a much more critical comment on the theme of greed, because it's suggesting how Scrooge thinks and how he operates, not just saying he's greedy. It's suggesting something about his greed and how that impacts his relationships. When they move on to this bit in the paragraph and say this is demonstrated before the extract, and then use this quote, "Our contract is an old one," there are references to other parts of the novella before the extract, so they're showing a more thorough understanding. The extract they got was just after she's said this bit about the contract. Again here they're zooming in on the word the word contract. Emphasises how greed has engulfed Scrooge's life and personality as he viewed the relationship as transactional, and then the idea that it shows that wealth is not linked to happiness. So they're considering the overall message of Dickens' writing. What was Dickens trying to suggest to the wealthy in the Victorian times? Here we get our first bit of context, demonstrating to the often greedy, ignorant and upper and middle classes that wealth is not integral to happiness, and that holding on to money selfishly results in societal problems, and then linking to the negative impact of that. This is very clear links to the contextual factors, and what's good here is it's showing how Dickens isn't just inspired by the contextual factors, but how it has impacted his text, how he has written his text according to these things. And then here as well, how we've just got in brackets here, this little reference to ignorance and want. This is helpful to the examiner and to us when we're marking your mocks, because it shows that you fully understand the whole book, because you are having these integrated ideas and references. Let's have a look at the next paragraph. So, as Scrooge has gotten wealthier, he has not gotten happier. This is a really helpful comment because it shows the progress of the themes within the novella. It's not just Scrooge doesn't feel happy, it's suggesting changes in his life. Then we've got this very short quote from the description of Fred, all in a glow. Very concise quote, directly links to the question, which is helpful. His warm personality radiates from his skin. So clear analysis of language. That's a very, very good and succinct way of linking that quote. Then we've got this subject terminology of antithesis, meaning clear opposite in the most extreme form, which is very helpful in explaining how you understand the relationship between characters. Then we've got some more AO2 here with these comments reflecting the depth of characters and their change. Shows that Scrooge's greed and constant desire for money has led him to misery and loneliness. So again, here we've got these suggestions of how the characters personality leads them down a certain path or changes them. So that shows an understanding of the whole novella. Here he is seen as solitary as an oyster at the start, so I like this because it's really switching between different quotes. We've got all in a glow, and then the ideas lead them on to solitary as an oyster. And this shows if you're able to flick between different parts of the text. This really shows a good understanding because it shows that you can have a look at the whole thing, and also you can zoom in on bits. This I really like in this one. So when it talks about Scrooge's hard shell, blocking off interactions from other people to pursue his miserly money-grabbing lifestyle. And here, the fact that oysters have pearls within them, showing that Scrooge and the wealthy do have ability to change their ways. This is a very nice little alternative interpretation, and that's going to push this person higher up the mark scheme because this analysis is becoming much more in-depth. Not only have they used the quote and said what it suggests about Scrooge, but it's having a look in more detail at the representation, the symbolism, all of those things. And then again, we have a little bit of context here benefiting the whole of society. This is a more implicit and subtle reference, but the fact that it's talking about society shows that they understand the contextual factors and the situation that Dickens was writing in. And then lastly, for this paragraph, the foundations for both Scrooge's and potentially the reader's redemption and rebirth. So this is helpful because it references the reader as well as the characters. It's not just Scrooge's redemption, but obviously the readers as well. Dickens was trying to effect social change when he wrote this, so it's showing a clear understanding of that. Let's move on to the next paragraph, and this one starts off strong with the link of a dream and linking it to the spirit. So the fact that they are able to take a word in the extract and link it to a wider part of the novella shows great skill and also very, very clear understanding of the whole novella. As Scrooge starts and ends this journey in bed, this suggests that the ghost of Christmas past and his journey into the past was a dream. Now, not only is this a lovely idea that there's a link between dreaming and the supernatural, but this is really helpful for you guys to remember that this is a reference. There is no quote used here. It might be a bit difficult to find quotes that show that Scrooge starts and ends the journey in stave 2 in his bed, but the fact that they've referenced it very specifically works in exactly the same way as a quote. So that goes with some advice not to panic if you can't think of a specific quote. As long as you're specific about the point in the novella that you are referring to, that still counts as AO1, and that's still going to help you to move up the mark scheme. So then we've got these linking of events between Fred's words about Christmas and the fact that 7 years had passed since Marley's death. So these are effects of language. Sorry, the person here is thinking about the effects of language, but doing it through the linking of these two events. Then we get this quote, and again here, the way that they've used the ellipsis to create a bit more clarity makes it very, very helpful for the examiner, and also shows that you know it well. Then we've got the symbolisation, and this is a very good use of subject terminology. Don't forget that there is no hierarchy of subject terminology. If you use the word character, it can get you the same sort of level on the mark scheme as the word symbolises or the word antithesis. What you want to do, though, is vary your subject terminology. If you don't talk about different techniques, that's not going to move you up. You need to talk about a variety of techniques. You can't just always talk about the similes or the metaphors. You've always got to have a look at a wide range of techniques. And symbolises, even though it seems quite basic, is a subject terminology word that we use in English that we wouldn't use in other subjects. So then they move on to talk about the chain. There we've got a clear analysis of language, how they chain society down, which is a nice way of using the quote to support your idea. Then we've got a bit more subtle context here, the idea of making it harder for society to move forward and make positive changes. This is a key contextual factor, so linking to society is very helpful. Next, we've got some more subject terminology through the use of irony. Again, it's quite a small basic bit, but it's helpful to explicitly say what Dickens is doing. And then this analysis is really good because it's got all of these very short embedded quotes in, although some of them aren't as short as the end, but it shows a progression and shows as well their clear and depth understanding. They know all of these quotes from different staves at different points of the novella, so it's very helpful. And then again, links to the question with Scrooge's greed and ignorance, and using another quote to back that idea up. And then the last part of this final big chunky paragraph, he simply chooses not to. This is a very clear explanation of what Scrooge is doing and how Scrooge behaves as a character. It's not just stating something about him, but again explaining who he is as a character and how he makes his decisions. We've got more AO2 here with the effects of the language, and then AO3 as well with the upper and middle classes. We see Bob Cratchit is exceptionally hardworking, coming to work on Christmas Eve and Boxing Day. Again, these are references and not quotes, and that's still very helpful. We understand that these are things that happen in the novella that are difficult to quote. You do not have to quote everything. Again, a bit more context, poverty being an issue of greater importance. Shifting references across the whole novella to show the knowledge and understanding. So the fact that we flicked between these parts earlier in the novella to these parts a little bit later shows that understanding. And then again, the effects of multiple audiences, not just the present audience of when Dickens was writing in 1843, but the contemporary audience being our modern audiences today. Then again, want symbolises both the working class's want for basic requirements, clear analysis of the character of want, and it clearly links to greed as well. So this person has decided not to talk about ignorance because it doesn't link to the theme of greed as well as want does. And that's very helpful because it's not just someone who's shoving in every single point they can think of, it's somebody who is building an idea through their essay. Again, we have a bit more context and link to Dickens' intention. And then as well at the end, we've got how Dickens' intended effect returns the reader and Scrooge, putting the characters together as role models. Even though this might seem like a very basic phrase, by using these two characters, there's something that is suggested there about the way that Dickens creates the novella and the way that Dickens is crafting the novella. So, while we're just on this, I just want to point out that these three AOs, you can see that they are scattered all across the paragraph. It isn't AO1, then AO2, then AO3. This person has done a very good job of integrating all of the AOs in one, and the reason why they've been able to do this is because they know the novella really, really well. So, some key points for you to remember for the mock. Number 1, to learn key quotes. This is really obvious, but go ahead and learn them. Use whatever method of learning quotes that you want to, but make sure that you do something that works for you and not just sit with a book in front of you or flashcards in front of you, because that doesn't necessarily help. Focus on the themes, I would say. It's more likely that you would get something on a theme in general, I think, and your knowledge of the characters will tie into those themes. Make sure you understand the entire book. Don't just say, oh, it might be stave 1 that's going to come up, so I'm going to focus on stave 1. You need to have a thorough and even understanding of the entire text. Develop your depth of analysis, and this is the key one, that, as I say, you move up the mark scheme based on the depth of your skills and how developed your skills are. And your last key point is that you need to revise, revise, revise. So hopefully this video has helped you in understanding what you need to be doing in the mock on Wednesday, and good luck.